Welcome to the World Cup Coast to Coast podcast, brought to you by thelines.com, coming to you from the west coast of the USA. Josh Lander, joined by my guy Dan Tracy across the pond, hanging out in England. Dan, how are you today, sir?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you, Josh?
Also doing well, Dan. Really ready to talk about groups E and F. E is going to be the most fun group, I believe, that we'll be talking about. The lined upon group of death, if you will. Japan as the third team in there, Costa Rica at the bottom, and then obviously you've got the world powers, Spain and Germany at the top of that group. So much fun in that one. We also do have a video up about Group F, which has my Belgian team in there as well. So a pretty fun group to talk about with Croatia, trying to give them a run for their money for that group as well. And then we will be talking about everything moving forward as well. I did want to start off, Dan, with a few things as we are sitting here. We're recording on October the 13th, a Thursday here in the U.S. Really where we're at right now is, we're sort of really into things. We've got a full steam in the EPL and the Premier League out there. Plenty of players playing in leagues such as the Premier League, Bundesliga, La Liga, etc. So, things to watch out for as everyone's in sort of, in the first third of their season still, but really coming into form. So now we're starting to see players either try to tend to injuries that they may, little nicks and bumps that they may have been picking up already, or really slowing down the amount of time that they're playing, or maybe potentially the level of effort they give for 90 minutes, so as to ensure that they're available for their nation in the end of November here in just about a month, 5 weeks or so. So, is there really any kind of update, any injuries that stand out to you, or anybody that we should be watching for in any of the leagues that you're following as we near this World Cup?
I think the biggest one that happened at the weekend was Trent Alexander-Arnold for Liverpool. I know he's not been quite in the England squad. There's still a big question over whether he actually makes the plane to Qatar, but you don't want to be injured at this point. Obviously, with the World Cup being in the winter, things have all changed. Usually, if it's a World Cup year, your injury concerns are April, May. But now we're kind of looking at October, 5 weeks to go. It's all about staying sharp, but also not hitting the red zone too early. It's all about sort of timing, but it's the great unknown for everyone, really. So the last thing you want is a injury now, but the last thing you want to avoid is being out of form, because our discussions over the last few weeks have been a case of not wild guesses. It's not sort of just plucking form out of thin air, but we've kind of got a general idea of what players will be going to the World Cup. But ultimately, there are going to be some seats up for grabs for each nation. So you really want to hit your form if you're on the fringes of the squad. And someone like Trent, who's been out of form and is now injured, has probably got even more work to do. So it's kind of the worst case scenario for him.
Yeah, no, fully agree. And we should mention too, obviously we're not playing in the summertime this World Cup, right? We're in Qatar, where the heat would just be too, insane for players to endure. And as a result, we've got this thing starting in November, technically fall, but leading into the winter for a lot of parts of the world. Qatar will be at least cool enough at that point to at least be able to host some soccer and some football. But I do think the points that you make are also very pertinent to La Liga. Obviously you're very, very close to the EPL. But there's a couple of players on this Spanish team, specifically on Barcelona, a couple of their young guys who, we obviously know that they'll make the squad. So to your point, there's some players who are still vying for, some of those last spots on the roster of their nation. But there's also players who are younger who are trying to make a name for themselves to continue to get some of that time on their World Cup team. Youngsters like Ferran Torres on the Spanish team there, also on Barcelona these days, and a couple other players up top as well, obviously Pedri and the like. So there's a couple of guys, especially on Barcelona, as we talk about for this Spanish team, that are still trying to really make a name for themselves to earn that time up top. And I think that's one thing that you see with this Spanish team as we really transition into talking about them, that that they're considered the favorite, -110 to come out of this group, which is the starting point for why I might prefer Germany already at +110, get a bit more for return on your money, and at the very least an even matchup in my opinion. And so for the Spanish team, I think the problem that you look at that the German team does not have is, can they finish at this point? Can they put the ball in the back of the net? They've got a lot of young guys, none of whom have done it on the big stage yet. And they're obviously really trying to get back into the swing of things, having lost in the last UEFA Nations final to France, obviously the last World Cup winner. So tell me, what do you make of Luis Enrique's squad and the Spanish team as they endure this group of death?
Well, the comparison for Spain is always what they did a decade or so ago. The golden generation, as we say, between 2008 and 2012. They won 2 European Championships and a World Cup. They were just the best national team in football at the time. Spain aren't that at the moment. They're not a bad team by any stretch of the imagination, but for what you kind of say, there's still a lot of things to come. It's probably a tournament or maybe even too soon for the Spanish. They've got a good crop of players, but not world class in every position like we had 10 years ago. You looked at the names like Ramos, Xavi, Iniesta, David Villa. It just went on and on the list. Iker Casillas, we could be here all day talking about great Spanish players. There's not really that many at the moment. They're very steady hands. Rodri, Koke in the middle, Ferran Torres, as you mentioned. So they're going to be, I don't know, they're not going to not get out of the group, put it that way. Whether they're going to win the group, we don't know, because in groups gone past, we've spoken about a clear team at the top and then second versus third, and that's going to be the defining swing game as to who else qualifies. But in this group, we've got a clear division between the two European powerhouses and the other two. So that's going to be the real key match, Spain-Germany. And if that is a stalemate, for example, then it's going to be a goal rush against playing Japan and Costa Rica. So you don't want to meet Spain in the World Cup. For Germany to be drawn with them is not great. For Costa Rica and Japan to beat them both is a terrible draw for them. So Spain have probably put a quarter-final team at best at the moment. But you kind of write them off at your peril at the same time. So keep an eye on them, but I wouldn't be rushing to back them outright at the moment.
Well, this group is the most fun because I think there's a ton of game theory that we can really apply as we sort of build our logic out, right? And to your point, the Spanish team, your initial reaction is minus 110 for them to come out of the group. Certainly not worth it for me, as it's an expectation. But I do think that, to your point, if that game with Germany is a stalemate there, then it comes down to who scores more goals, obviously, and who gives up the least. And Japan is a team, I don't want to skip over Germany too quickly, but I will briefly say before we talk about them more, Japan is a team that has the attacking side to really be able to, I think, to really surprise some teams with who they have up top. And their ability, they've got a few guys, as we know, Takumi Minamino on Liverpool there as well, and a couple other guys that play in Bundesliga as well, Ao Tanaka, who's had a few goals in the World Cup himself. So I think there's opportunity for goals to be scored upon these teams. And as we know, goals given up is that first tiebreaker. And in that German side, goals are not going to be easy to come by for their opponents, which really leads you to feel pretty good about Germany's chance to potentially, you take over the lead of this group after playing Japan, compared to what you think Spain can do. Basically, Spain's defense, Germany's defense, similar, but I still got to give the nod to the Germans there, in which case you feel better about their ability to limit goals against Japan, which would make those plus 110 odds to come out of the group feel pretty nice.
Yeah, I mean, in a toss of a coin fixture such as Germany-Spain, you're kind of going to look for the team with the higher odds, because it could go either way. So why really back the shorter team? Because it's a 50-50 chance really for them to win the group or not. Let's go for the higher price. And with Germany offering that, and as you say, a more robust defence, they've probably got a better out-and-out striker. I know Timo Werner hasn't quite clicked in terms of club football in the last couple of seasons, but for Germany, he seems to do the business. You could also argue that Alvaro Morata, is a steady hand for Spain, but he's a bit never quite on it. He's not quite carried the lineage of great Spanish strikers. So again, in a goal race, when you're putting Morata and Werner together, I'd probably go for Werner and then him sort of carrying Germany to the top of the group. Add the likes of Kai Havertz as well, Leroy Sané, Serge Gnabry. They've got a brilliant set of attacking wide forwards. You've got Thomas Müller, who seems to be without age. He won the 2014 World Cup for Germany, but he's still probably going to be a linchpin of the German team. They are going through something of a transitional phase themselves. Hansi Flick is their manager. Yep. They didn't have a great Nations League. You probably should have won the group when you consider Hungary and Italy are, again, not sort of great powerhouses in terms of where they are. Italy didn't even qualify for the World Cup, nor did Hungary. So Germany were probably the favourites to win that group. They didn't. But again, they are hosting Euro 2024, so they are probably going to use this tournament as, not a warm-up, but they're obviously going to go and want to win as much as anyone else. But this might be the perfect launch pad to then go and win the European Championships on home soil in 2 years' time.
Which feels right for them. I mean, obviously, you don't know how much longer Thomas Müller is going to be playing at the level that he is, still really controlling a lot of the sort of central part of the attacking midfield, does he? So I think you feel pretty good about their ability to control the game, obviously, as well. We talk about Kimmich and Serge Gnabry. Really, also, as we talk about the attack for the Germans, it's much more prolific, in my opinion, than the Spanish attack. You've got four of the top 20 roughly, top goal scorers odds go to a German player before you even get to a single Spanish player expected to put goals in, according to most odds on these U.S. sports books. So just a ton of opportunities and guys who can put the ball in the back of the net for the Germans from all over the pitch, which really makes you feel good about their ability to not need to necessarily break down a defense all the way inside the 6-yard box, obviously, which will continue to lead to more chances and more goals. They just continue to rip shots from all over the pitch. So I think you feel pretty good about the Germans getting a few more goals and limiting that Japan team, who, like I said, has a few guys here who you might consider, definitely plenty of players in the EPL. They've got Arsenal center back there in Tomiyasu. And so I think there's a couple of, different guys also in the Bundesliga, which is obviously a lot of times how we gauge these things based on our knowledge of players and the leagues that we watch. But to your point about certain guys who, like Manuel Neuer, who show up in the World Cup for their nation a bit more than they do during in between 3 or 4 years. So for Japan, I guess my roundabout way of asking this question is, do you see a scenario in which, that third level team is able to come in and make a bit of noise and at least, put it on them, plus 300 for Japan to qualify from the group? Let me say this. I would sprinkle a bit of a few units on there before I would consider really putting my money on Spain just to come out of the group at minus 110. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I guess if you're trying to extract some value from the group, you go for Japan, really, because, again, if you're asking Spain to win the group, that's far from a foregone conclusion. At the same time with Japan, I mean, it's a really tough draw for them. They are neat in attack. They've got very skillful players who can do damage. And, yes, they've got Tomiyasu at the back. But they lack a bit of real strength. I think that's just the way the Japanese team has always been built. It's quite sort of nimble, but not really got enough bite in the middle of the park. I think that might be their undoing when going up against the likes of Spain and Germany. So I think they'll be able to hold their own to a certain degree, but I wouldn't be in a race to back Japan in terms of, the individual matches and then playing against the Spanish and the Germans. You'd always be looking for the European nation to win. So I know Germany crashed out of the World Cup 4 years ago as holders in a group which included Mexico and South Korea, I believe. So they're not going to, they kind of know what went wrong 4 years ago, so they don't want to make the same mistakes twice. And I think for that reason, they've kind of learnt a very hard lesson, and with a new manager. So I don't feel that Japan are going to sort of lay a glove on them this time around.
Agreed. Yeah, I think that, and that's the other part of the German team that I think we all feel good about, is that ego that they'll bring to the table, knowing that they've underperformed, especially in that early exit recently in the last World Cup. So I think that there's a bit of let's say moxie and motivation for that German side to come through. And yeah, I think you expect Costa Rica to struggle a bit more than when they did have their really nice finish back there in Brazil, making it pretty deep into the tournament as probably their best finish. And this is just not the same team. And this group is not going to be the easiest to qualify out of. And if you do come in second in this group, you are awaiting the Group F likely winner in Belgium, which is not a team that you really want to face before you have to at this point, which we'll talk about more in that Group F breakdown.